Today I'm joined by Sandra Jones. She is MD of Dataloft. And Dataloft are a housing market analytics business, part of the Price Hubble group of companies which analyse and tracks housing market data right across Europe. Sandra, you guys have been analysing and tracking for, over 10 years now. Given that you guys constantly review the stats and the trends and make forecasts about what's going on, I was really keen to get your input into the analysis of those stats, because it's facts that we're interested in rather than opinions. National house prices have been falling in some parts of the UK, but actually it's also true to say that they've been faring better in other parts. So I think the question that's on everybody's minds is, are they falling? And if so, how much are they likely to fall over the next 12 months or so? What's your take on that, just to kick things off with a big question?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of headlines at the moment about house prices. And I think the first thing to say is that they're all slightly out of sync with each other. So if you look at those indices that come out, some of them are based on asking prices, which is very timely, but can change because you can
so when they
not
first
necessarily
go
pay
on
the asking price. Yes. Some of them are based on, come from the mortgage companies or the lenders, and those are based on the price that's fixed sold subject to contract.
So that's
later down the line.
Some months down the track.
Yeah, but more accurate because it is the price that's been agreed rather than asked. And then the third lot are based on land registry, which is the most precise but also the most lagged in time. So the numbers when they finally come through to the land registry could be 6 months after the price was agreed. So when we see these house price indices, and they all tell us slightly different numbers, there are good reasons for that. And they're all right in their own way. So just to set that as context.
So they all of the analysis, that they are factually true, but in order for them to be useful, someone's got to understand at what point in the process they've been taken from.
Exactly. And I think because some of them are still showing positive growth, but generally, as you say, I think everyone recognises that house prices are settling back.
Can I go back to the question though? How far are prices expected to fall generally over the next 12 months?
Okay. So if we say that probably up until now, over the last 12 months, they've fallen about 3%. If we go from peak to now, they've fallen about 4%, because the peak was less than a year ago. We would expect a similar fall over the next year.
So
I think they've got further. Yeah,
about 4%.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nothing more dramatic, but they need to come down a bit.
And given that you look at data and analysis from right across the country, are there trends or kind of knock-on effects that you see in one area that you then feel are likely to appear in another area? And I guess what's on my mind is it used to be a well-known kind of adage, what happened in London would gradually ripple out to the regions. Is that still the case?
I mean, that's definitely a thing, isn't it? Yeah, London tends to lead the pack. But there are an awful lot of things that distort that relationship, and particularly since COVID. So in COVID, strongest house price growth clearly wasn't London, and it was nothing to do with the ripple from London. It was to do with people making very big life decisions. Wanting, to move to the coast, to move to more rural areas, to move to bigger homes. So they had to go to lower cost areas where there are bigger homes. So we see, so there's a lot of things that distort that relationship. But yes, there is a ripple effect, and we do see, I guess your question is, what do we look at for early warning signals? Or early signals, So there are a number of metrics we'd look at. So we'd look at mortgage approvals, because mortgage approvals are obviously a lead indicator for what eventually flows through to sales. So the number of mortgage approvals right now is significantly down. A normal rate would be about 60,000 a month. We're now at about 45,000 a month for new approvals. So we know that's a signal that there are going to be fewer transactions. We'd look at sentiment, because that's such a huge driver of the housing market. So
how on earth do you analyse sentiment?
Yeah, well, there's the RICS sentiment survey, and they poll estate agents who are right there at the coalface. They are the people who get almost like the emotional response to who's looking and how they're feeling about what they're going to pay and where they want to look. So we do look at those, and that sentiment survey is indicating falling confidence.
Okay. Yeah.
We'd look at gap between asking and achieved prices.
Yes.
So if that gap gets bigger, the moment it's not, it's probably around 5% achieved to asking, but some agents are saying it's moving towards 10%. So we'd look at that.
Do you look at the time between going on the market and going under offer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big one. And that's something that agents are very conscious of at the moment, because there's something related to those two things. If you get the price right, you'll be on the market less time.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's always a period in the cycle where the time on the market gets longer because the prices are too ambitious.
Yeah. I generally think it's great what you guys do at Dataloft, because you can analyze the whole country's data and see what's moving. And there are so many variables, so many moving parts, but they all affect one another. Sentiment is, of course, a really key one. It confounded everyone during the pandemic and the global recession and all the goings on. Sentiment you would have thought would be on the floor, and yet the housing market was going through the roof. So it's a funny one. Can we talk about affordability?
Yeah.
And the amount that a typical borrower can borrow has fallen, and at the same time, the amount that they are required to come up with a deposit has risen. And I've read up to 40% deposits are being asked in some cases. So affordability is very much still a barrier. That must affect demand in the market. But from your analysis of the stats, how much of an impact will that have if less people can borrow, less people are willing to borrow?
So the first thing we would look at there would be what is the capacity of a market to absorb higher rates of affordability? Because you might find, I mean, there are huge differences in different parts of the country.
Yes.
So say in Scotland, affordability is around 13%.
Okay.
And in the north, 15%. In London, closer to 37%. So huge differences. But then that would take you to saying, okay, where affordability is more stretched, so in London and the southeast, does that mean those markets are under more pressure? But then, to your point about deposits, we find that those markets have also had more support. So there are a lot of people who've had family help.
Yeah.
So where over time, where house price growth has been stronger, then you have a whole generation of people who are maybe now owning without a mortgage and are able to pass money down through the generations, and that distorts that relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what about comparing average earnings and incomes to average house prices? And obviously that is very different in different parts of the country. How's that kind of stacking up? How's that looking?
That's really how we arrive at those affordability ratios. Right. So yes, and what we found, actually, we were looking at this recently, and we went back over 10 years, and in places that have had the highest house price growth, they haven't necessarily had the highest wages growth, which is what led us to thinking, well, there's something else going on here, and that's about the size of deposit and the amount of help. So what you find is if I give the example, wages growth has been broadly the same across the UK. It's somewhere between 28 and 32% over 10 years. Okay. House price growth has ranged from 30 or 28% all the way through to 65%.
Yes.
And the strongest growth has been, set aside for the moment the most recent, what went on in COVID, but over that 10-year period, the strongest house price growth has been around London and the southeast and the wider southeast. So how are prices able to grow ahead of wages? And the only explanation is the amount of deposits.
Yes.
Something to do with Help to Buy.
Yes.
But also it's housing wealth. So where there has been long-term higher house price growth, those people
got more equity.
It's the bank of mum and dad, isn't it?
But also we've got interest rates.
Yes.
We could borrow more money when interest rates were lower. So there's another variable to throw into the mix.
Absolutely. And that has been a huge driver of house price growth as well, just the capacity to borrow.
Yeah. Those days are gone.
Those days, well, for the moment, they're gone. And probably, they are gone. Yes.
Yeah. I think we became rather dangerously accustomed to cheap money. Yeah. And actually, maybe you'll know, it feels, I don't know what the historic average interest rate is, but we're probably about there now, aren't we? It's just we're not it doesn't feel very nice because we haven't had it for such a long time.
Yeah, but I think it's the rate at which it's changed has been quite shocking, hasn't it? Okay. So literally, if you compare what you were paying 12 months ago with what you're paying today on a first-time buyer, typical mortgage, it is quite shocking, the difference, except that we've had fixed rates, of course.
Yes.
So that's not all unwound yet.
Would you say, I mean, there's much in the press about the people coming off fixed rate mortgages, and that's going to be a real shock and a nasty shock. But the numbers of people involved, it's hideous for them. I don't want to take anything away from that. But the actual numbers of people involved, that number is not sufficient to destabilise the market, is it?
No, it's not. And that's what's so difficult when you talk about the housing market, because you can sound very complacent. Because actually, as a market, just looking objectively, it's reasonably well protected because the lenders have been so much more cautious since the global financial crisis, because deposits have been higher, and for the reason you've just given, there are fixed rate mortgages. There are a relatively small proportion of owners who are exposed in the short term to those interest rate increases.
Of course, what no one factored in was that at the same time as interest rates were going up, so was the cost of heating and fuel and energy. So that's a scary one.
It is, but I think where that has a bigger impact on the number of new buyers and the number of transactions rather than so existing homeowners. Clearly, I don't want to sound complacent because there are people in terrible circumstances, and there was new data out yesterday looking at the number of people sinking into poverty and so on. Those things are very real. But if you're asking me about the market as an objective thing that operates, then it's at the moment it's not too badly exposed to those interest rate rises. But where it is if you're looking for new buyers because they have to take on the new interest rates. But people who bought in the last 5 years have often fixed for 5 years, 3 years. So on.
And also, of course, it's true to say that people who bought in the last 5 years have probably got 20% equity because the house price has been going up.
I mean, but their costs still go up, don't they?
Yes. What would you say the average age of a first-time buyer? What are the stats showing on that?
So it's average 33, and in London a little bit older, 34, something like that. And you see various figures, but that's about right. And
bank of mum and dad being a massive part to play in that.
For those lucky enough to have a mum and dad with a bank.
Can we talk a bit about housing supply? It's again another big topic. We don't build enough houses. There's a housing shortage. It's been the case for years. Builders have the government have never delivered on their targets. I don't see that changing. Is that inbuilt shortage, does it push up prices? Does it support prices? What's your take on that?
Certainly supports prices, doesn't it? I mean, that's sort of basic economics. But the point you made earlier about long-term low interest rates are probably what has been the strongest driver of price growth over the last decade, certainly. But I don't think there's anybody who doesn't recognise that we have a problem with supply of housing. And it seems sort of intractable. I mean, I saw something today about SME builders coming out and saying, we need a voice in government. There are things we can do if you will support us. And so a lot of pressure for government to support the construction industry, actually across all tenures. But then also a lot of resistance, and we all know that's real, don't we? So, maybe you reform the planning system, maybe you give more, and I think that's probably the key. But would you want to be a politician trying to navigate that one?
It's a really tricky one. But we have a rising population, and we have immigration, when people live longer, and they leave home earlier, and
actually, that's a really important point, because it's not just about numbers of homes, it's the type of homes, isn't it? So we don't just hitting that magic
target
number is not the point, because is it for elderly people? Is it for young single people? Is it for divorcees? Is it for people living here temporarily and moving on?
The key thing is we've got to build what we want where we need it, and at the right price point. But of course, what's happening at the moment also is developers are going, this is all a bit hard, I'll slow up. And then the shortage gets worse.
No, of course. And they're under a lot of cost pressure. I mean, Those things are really difficult. I heard someone called Darren Rodwell speaking recently. He's it's terrible. I ought to know. He's from Barking and Dagenham, and I think he's probably this chief executive or something like that. Anyway, he's been hugely successful at getting homes built in Barking and Dagenham, which is one of the most it's one of the most deprived boroughs in London, if not the most deprived. Hugely successful at getting homes built. And he says, he stood on this platform and he said, I understand that people living in leafy places don't want homes built next door. I understand that. But if that is the case, then you have to pay for the privilege, because what is happening at the moment is that my residents in Barking and Dagenham are having these home built and then having all the pressures to support, with amenities and facilities to service that much higher population. So if you want not to have the population, you have to pay for that privilege. So there are, there's a lot of policy issues that could be addressed beyond just...
By one of the many housing ministers.
Yeah, exactly.
I was interested to learn about affordable mortgage payments in relation to incomes. Where are we at with that, and does it dramatically alter in different parts of the country?
Yes, there are very wide variations. So in fact, ranging from 13% in some parts of the country, meaning that your mortgage payment would be 13% of your gross salary.
Right.
We're making assumptions here about, this is for a first-time buyer, by the way. We're making assumptions that they borrow 80%.
Okay.
And that, and on interest rates, obviously being the current interest rate.
Sure.
But ranging from 13% in Scotland and the north of England.
Which is quite low.
Which is quite low, could be quite reassuring, up to 37% in London, which sounds shockingly high, and you might think those people are the most stretched and the most under pressure. But actually, that calculation is done by looking at average earnings and average house prices for a first-time buyer.
Okay.
In reality, those buyers in London and the South East often have much, much bigger deposits. So they might be less exposed. So although that headline calculation looks frightening in the South East,
but they've got a bigger deposit, whether it's from bank of mum and dad or...
So it doesn't mean it makes it available to everybody, but for those people for whom it has been available, and if we're talking about how exposed is the market, those people who have bought in those areas have often bought with very big deposits.
Got it.
So the impact on their actual earnings... so actually, I can give you an example. A first-time buyer in London, their mortgage payment a year ago, based on our assumptions, would have been $1,546 a month. Today, it would be $2,189. So that's the increase. For an average UK buyer, it would have gone from £770 a month to just over £1,000 a month.
Okay.
So the London buyers. The London buyer, because I know those numbers. So the London first-time buyer, a theoretical, notional first-time buyer, is paying an extra £700 a month. The average UK first-time buyer is paying an extra £250 a month or £300 a month. Okay. So actually, the pain is much more for those who are in the higher-priced areas.
Yes.
Except that a lot of them have been helped by Bank of Mum and Dad.
There's, again, so many variables.
Just other things that distort those relationships.
Dataloft, do you track in different parts of the country where it is cheaper to rent and where it is actually cheaper to buy?
It's a moving target. So we look at this regularly and the balance tips over time. So for the past 10 years, with low interest rates, it's looked cheaper to buy. And then that relationship shifts as interest rates have risen over the last year. So if I give you an example from London, in a year ago, this is the buy versus rent equation, a median rent was $1,650 a month. The equivalent property to a first-time buyer with a mortgage was $1,600. So £50 advantage leaning towards the mortgage. Okay. Today, the equivalent, the median rent is now $1,850 a month, but the first-time buyer mortgage would be $2,190. So it's tipped in favour of renting rather than owning. Okay,
and that's because interest rates have risen, but actually at the same time, rents have risen as well.
Yeah, I know, they have, but...
And does that alter in different parts of the country all the time?
it does alter in different parts of the country. And actually, it's important not to take it out of context, because there are also other costs relating to buying. So if you're renting for a couple of years, you don't necessarily want the transaction costs, or if you think you're moving on in a couple of years, you don't want to incur the transaction costs, and also, the costs of running a home. So it's more than that, but then I think, as I said earlier, there will be emotion around owning a home.
It's not all about the finances and actually having your own piece of England, having your security that you can do what you want with, and you might be able to add value, and you put down roots in the community and send your kids to the school, and all of that. It's all part of the same sort of decision, isn't it?
Well, what's interesting is the sharply rising rents do focus attention on that aspiration to own, don't they? So you see people thinking, well, if my rent's going up by this much, I want to look at owning.
Yes.
But actually...
But I think at the same time, people now, our audience, are thinking, well, prices have fallen. Why would I buy now? I'll wait for the bottom of the market. Yeah, but I'm likely to time the bottom of the market, and rents are rising. So this all boils down to it's each to their own individual circumstances. There's no right or wrong answer. People have got to make their own
unfortunately. Choices. As you say, sort of fairly minor price falls, and then also earnings growth, which is the other thing that's going on at the moment. Earnings are growing quite fast for those lucky enough to be earners, and that can change the equation again, can't it? As what you can afford to borrow, and how, the extent to which you can absorb rising costs or the cost of a mortgage.
Sandra, I'm ever so grateful. Great to talk to you. Great information, and I'm sure our audience will find it very useful. I think the general essence is, if you feel it is right for you and you've weighed up all the pros and the cons, then there's nothing wrong with cracking on right now. Good luck. And if you need lots of information and advice, it's all there on the Move IQ site. Thanks for watching.